Hello everyone, I am Maha Assad, a graduate student in the Civil Engineering Department at American University of Sharjah. Today I will be presenting our research project entitled as Modeling the Behavior of CFRP-strengthened reinforced concrete slabs under fire exposure. The co-authors are Professor Rami Hawileh and Professor Jamal Abdalla from American University of Sharjah. The outline of my presentation will be a brief introduction about the research project, the objectives of this research project, the methodology followed in carrying out the research, the results and findings, then the conclusions and references. Now, carbon fiber reinforced polymers are well known for their superior properties and have been used in many applications in the last decades, since they have high strength-to-weight ratios, resistance to corrosion, versatility, and ease of installation. CFRP can be applied to the soffit of beams or slabs by several techniques, of which the most common are externally bonded reinforcement, where CFRP sheets or plates are adhered using epoxy to the concrete substrate. The other method is the near-surface mounting, where FRP strips or rods are bonded inside grooves in the concrete cover. However, CFRP strengthening systems have some disadvantages. First, since they are linear elastic materials, they fail in an abrupt and brittle manner. Second, they have poor resistance to fire, as can be seen in the displayed figures. For example, the bond between the FRP material and concrete is highly degraded at increasing temperatures. Also, the mechanical properties of both the FRP and the bonding matrix are decreased due to the softening of these materials at their glass transition temperature, Tg, which is typically between 45 and 120 degrees Celsius. The matrix will decompose at temperatures of 300 to 500 degrees Celsius. This means that the FRP strengthening system will be subjected to failure in incidents of fire. Therefore, studying the performance of FRP strengthened structural members under elevated temperatures is crucial in order to propose safety guidelines and to develop effective fire protection systems. So the objectives of this research is to create a finite element model that can predict the behavior of CFRP strengthened RC slabs under fire exposure using two different techniques, the externally bonded reinforcement and the near surface mounted technique, and to validate the results of the finite element model with previous published experimental data. Three-dimensional finite element models were created using the simulation environment ANSYS version 19.2. The geometrical configuration and material properties are the same as the ones tested by Azevedo et al. In a previous experimental investigation, where they tested a control slab, an externally bonded slab, and a near-surface mounted slab under 4-point bending test at room temperature, and they also subjected the soffit of another strengthened slabs to ASTM E119 standard fire. As we can see in figure 4, the cross sections of the tested slabs. In figure 5, it shows the developed finite element models for the strengthened slabs. As we can see in figure 5c, quarter of the slab was developed to reduce computational time, and boundary conditions were applied in the symmetrical axes. And figure 6 shows the test setup in the experimental investigation. So the models were analyzed under ambient temperature to validate their structural response with experimental results. The load versus deflection behavior of the three finite element models was validated using the published data by Azevedo et al. Then heat transfer analysis was performed for the strengthened slabs in order to obtain temperature profiles. Finally, structural models were developed to perform the stress analysis of the strengthened slabs using the two different techniques, EBR and NSM, to compare the results with the experimental data. Now, as we know, finite element modeling involves finding analysis results at all nodes of the elements that form the whole structure. Therefore, each material was defined using a suitable element formulation. For instance, in the thermal model, concrete was modeled using element solid 70, which is an 8-noded linear brick element that is capable of transferring heat via conduction, convection, and radiation. Also, steel reinforcement was modeled using a 2-noded truss element. FRP and epoxy were just like concrete, solid 70. Now for the structural model in which stresses and displacements are found, equivalent element types were used. So for concrete, solid 65 was used, and this element is capable of simulating concrete cracking and crushing. However, FRP, epoxy, and the rigid plates were simulated using the linear brick element solid 185, which doesn't have the ability of cracking and crushing. In order to simulate the separation of the CFRP sheet from the concrete substrate, which is the typical failure mode of externally bonded reinforcement systems, Inter 205 elements were used and the cohesive zone material model. In this model is a function of the slip between the FRP material and concrete. The typical bond slip model starts with an increasing segment up to the ultimate shear stress and its corresponding slip, as can be seen from figure 8a. After that, a softening response takes place until the maximum slip occurs. Nakaba et al. Bond slip model was assigned in this problem. The finite element model incorporates temperature-dependent material properties. These include both the thermal and mechanical properties of concrete, steel reinforcement, and CFRP. Figure 9 shows the variation of the thermal conductivity of concrete and steel reinforcement with temperature. These material models were adopted from Eurocode 2. Similarly, specific heat and density of concrete and steel reinforcement were adopted from Eurocode 2 as shown in Figure 10 and Figure 11. Previous proposed models were adopted for the variation of the CFRP material property with temperature. In this study, Griffiths et al. Model was used. The mechanical material properties include modulus of elasticity, thermal expansion, and stress-strain curves. For concrete and steel, they were also calculated using Eurocode 2. Since CFRP is a linear elastic material, only modulus of elasticity model was assigned. It was adopted from previous proposed model in the literature. And this is the variation of the thermal expansion with temperature for concrete and steel calculated from Eurocode 2. 3 slabs were modeled and analyzed under room temperature. The load deflection curves and their comparison with the experimental load deflection curves published in Acevedo et al. Are shown here. It can be clearly seen that there is a good agreement between the experimental and numerically predicted curves. The finite element model can perfectly predict the behavior of the slab until yielding of steel reinforcement, indicated here by the clear change in the slope of the curve. After that, the model can predict to a good extent the slab response with a slight under-prediction of the capacity of the control slab. There's a quite overprediction of the ultimate load value in both strengthened slabs, the EBR and NSM. So this minimal difference can be attributed to the variation in material properties between the experimentally tested values and the values assigned to the model. So the finite element model confirms on the superiority of the NSM technique in terms of higher ultimate loads and deformational capacity, as can be seen in figure 16C. Nodal temperatures were obtained from the heat transfer analysis performed in the thermal model, and they were validated with the experimental temperature profiles. Finally, the load deflection curve of the two strengthened slabs under fire exposure was obtained from the structural model. As can be seen, the finite element model can perfectly predict the displacement behavior of the slabs when exposed to fire. Conclusions. The developed model predicted to a good extent the behavior of the slab from initial loading until failure under combined effects of static loading and fire exposure. Finite element simulation is a powerful tool for the investigation of reinforced concrete structural members, strengthened reinforced concrete members, and their behavior under ambient and elevated temperatures. Results from the proposed numerical model can be further utilized to test various parameters, for example, the fire protection systems, reinforcement configuration, fire exposure scenarios, etc. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy to hear your questions.